In the beginning, before kingdoms rose, before empires fell, there was only God.
Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever made a promise to God, or even just to yourself, and said, I am never doing this again? Whether you're looking at this from a theological angle or strictly a psychological one, making a firm, absolute vow to change your behavior, only to find yourself crossing that exact same line practically the next day, is a pretty universal human experience. It's the perfect place for us to start because it perfectly captures that moment where our highest intentions crash right into the lowest reality of our execution.
And you know, that discrepancy creates a very specific, very painful pattern that the text calls the repetitive cycle. It goes like this. Step 1, the promise. Never again. We draw a hard line in the sand. Step 2, the fall. We slip right back into the exact same habit. And step 3, the guilt. I want to deliberately slow down here for a second, because this isn't just about making a random mistake. It's about the emotional weight of a predictable failure. It is absolutely devastating to watch yourself go through the exact same motions, knowing exactly how it ends, and yet feeling totally powerless to break the sequence.
It kind of creates this specific, isolating trap. Same sin, same habit, same guilt. Notice how the word same keeps popping up? Well, that's not an accident. It highlights the exhausting, endless loop of the whole experience. It's this exact sameness, this feeling that you're making literally zero progress, that acts as the primary trigger for profound spiritual doubt. The repetition basically convinces us that no real change has happened at all, effectively weaponizing our own track record against us.
Which leads us directly to that incredibly loud internal voice of shame. After looping through this cycle a few times, a very specific narrative starts to form in your head. If you were really saved, you wouldn't still struggle. It's a fascinating, but super heavy psychological burden. We essentially start to equate the mere presence of a struggle with being a complete fake. Our mind's logic is that a quote-unquote real transformation would completely wipe out any desire or tendency to fall. Therefore, if the bad habit is still there, the whole transformation must be a sham.
So what does this all mean? This brings us to a critical turning point in the text. We have to ask, does the presence of a struggle actually invalidate your faith? Is that voice of shame telling the truth? Well, right here is where the author pivots away from the problem and introduces a radically different, really brilliant way to interpret our own internal resistance. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it introduces the river metaphor. It's honestly like a physics lesson for the human soul, comparing our spiritual resistance to the physics of a moving body of water. To really understand human willpower, faith, and failure, the author wants us to visualize a flowing river. It's a masterful way to take these super abstract feelings of guilt and ground them in a concrete physical image that we intuitively get.
Think about a dead body in a river. What does it do? It simply floats with the current. It offers literally zero resistance. It doesn't fight at all. But a living person, only someone who is actively alive is going to fight against that current. And this physical fight directly parallels the internal reality of someone who hates their sin. The resistance itself, the very act of fighting against the flow of the habit, becomes the central focal point.
A dead person doesn't fight. Just let that sink in for a second. This is a profound flip. The very thing that is causing you immense guilt right now, that exhausting daily fight against your own habits, is actually the definitive proof that you are alive. Think about it. If you were truly detached, if there was absolutely no internal life, you'd just float effortlessly down the river with the habit. You literally wouldn't care. The fact that you are fighting proves you are spiritually alive.
So the crucial point is that we completely reframe the evidence. Instead of viewing your struggle as proof of a fake faith, it becomes undeniable evidence of spiritual life. Look at the breakdown. First, you hate your sin. Second, you are actively fighting. And those two realities culminate in a third, huge realization. God is still working inside you. The struggle isn't a sign that you've been abandoned. It's the actual mechanism of active, ongoing internal work. And this directly dismantles that toxic guilt cycle we talked about earlier. If you've been carrying the heavy burden of feeling like an imposter or a total hypocrite because you keep falling into the same trap, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not fake because you struggle. No way. The mere existence of your internal conflict is exactly what validates your authenticity. You care enough to be conflicted.
And it's so important to remember this internal war isn't some new, modern phenomenon. Even the Apostle Paul, a literal towering figure in faith history, openly admitted, "The good I want to do, I do not do." The text uses this to normalize the struggle, proving it's a fundamental part of the human experience.
If someone widely considered a massive pillar of faith experienced this exact same disconnect between his intentions and his actions, it just shows that the struggle is a normal feature of the journey, not something that disqualifies you from it.
However, we do need to point out a gentle but very firm warning the author gives here. The real danger is when you stop fighting completely. Ultimate failure isn't found in stumbling, or breaking a promise, or falling back into a bad habit for the 100th time. The ultimate failure is surrender. The real danger is letting the guilt convince you to just give up the fight altogether, to become that dead body that simply accepts the current of the river and floats away.
Let's move to and see how this builds into a necessary, clear pivot in our behavior, because our natural, destructive instinct is running away from God, driven by shame, right? It's the totally expected psychological reaction to feeling guilty, but the counterintuitive response the text calls for is running to Him. When you fall, your natural instinct to hide literally must be replaced by an instinct to seek restoration.
And why run toward? Because, as the text beautifully puts it, Jesus is not waiting to destroy you. He's waiting to lift you back up. It's a huge, profound shift, viewing this moment of failure as a restorative moment rather than a punitive one. It completely challenges this ingrained assumption that falling results in immediate destruction and replaces it with an image of someone physically lifting you back onto your feet so you can keep going.
Which brings us to the actual reality of the journey. The author acknowledges two conflicting truths simultaneously. First, you fell. The failure is totally real and we aren't minimizing the broken promise. But second, you are still in the fight. Acknowledging that you fell doesn't mean your journey is over. It's honestly just part of remaining in that ongoing, active resistance against the river's current.
And this is exactly why this whole framework matters so much. As long as you are still in the fight, the story isn't over. That repetitive cycle of guilt we looked at, it might desperately try to convince you you've reached a dead end, but your continued struggle is the very pulse of a living, breathing story.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to deeply consider. We've seen today that resistance requires life. So, since a dead person doesn't fight, how does recognizing your current struggle change the way you view your own resilience today? Think about that as you look at your own habits and internal battles. The fight isn't your failure, it's your heartbeat. Thanks for joining me, and I'll catch you in the next one.